In the late autumn of 1894, when the towns were quiet and the fields were colorless, a young orphan named Maribel Ashford arrived at Blackthorn Manor. She was only 7, thin from travel, and carrying a suitcase that rattled when she walked. The driver had barely spoken to her until the final mile, when he suddenly leaned close and said, almost in a whisper, "Don't wander at night. The children in that place, they hear things." Before she could ask him what he meant, he snapped the reins and hurried her to the manor gates. Blackthorn Manor loomed above her, tall as a cathedral and twice as gloomy. Its stone walls were stained with age, its tall windows looked like black eyes, and its doors were so heavy they needed 2 servants to pull them open. The iron gate had carvings of roses and thorny vines, all twisted and rusted, giving the impression that the house had grown out of the earth like a sickly tree. The housekeeper, Miss Crowley, greeted Maribel with a long, expressionless stare. Her face had the color of old paper, and her hair was pulled so tightly back that it made her eyes seem wider than normal. She spoke in a cold, clicked voice as she told Maribel that she was late, even though Maribel was early. Then she led her down endless halls lined with portraits that seemed to follow her with their eyes. Knock, knock, knock. But the knocking came from inside the wall beside her. She ran. Maribel was too afraid to ask questions. The house was larger than anything she had ever imagined. Even her footsteps seemed swallowed by the dark wood floors, and every whisper bounced strangely off the tall ceilings. She passed doors that were locked, doors that were cracked open just enough for her to glimpse motion inside, and doors that didn't have handles at all. In the dining hall, Lady Beaumont was waiting. She was a tall, elegant woman with sharp cheekbones and pale skin that never seemed to flush with warmth. She spoke softly, but her words had weight. She addressed the children gathered at the long table and introduced 3 rules. Rule 1, no child must approach the east wing. Rule 2, no child must leave their bed after sunset. Rule 3, if knocking is heard from anywhere in the manor, it must be ignored. She did not explain why. She simply let her gaze sweep over each child, slowly, sternly, until they nodded in silence. That night, Maribel tried to sleep, but the manor had a life of its own. She heard faint scraping under the floorboards, like fingernails dragging slowly across wood. Then she heard something stranger, something that sounded like a child sobbing far, far beneath her bed. When she pressed her ear against the floor, the crying stopped so suddenly that she jolted upright. The next morning, 2 children were missing. Lady Beaumont calmly told the others they had been adopted, but Maribel didn't believe it. Their beds were still warm, their shoes were still beside them, their belongings remained untouched. The older children didn't question it either. They only looked down, fidgeting with their hands as if afraid to speak. Maribel asked the boy who slept in the bed next to hers what had really happened. His name was Samuel, a quiet boy with hollow cheeks and restless eyes. He leaned close to her and whispered, "They don't leave through the gates, they leave through the walls." Before she could ask him what that meant, Miss Crawley stormed over and dragged him away by the arm. Maribel didn't see Samuel again after that day. As weeks passed, more children vanished. For each one, Lady Beaumont always repeated the same explanation: adoption. But the staff never prepared them for departure. No one visited, no one signed anything, and no child ever returned to the town to confirm it. Maribel began exploring the manor in secret. In the enormous library, she found an old wing filled with forgotten books and portraits covered in cloth sheets. Curiosity overpowered fear. She pulled the sheets off and revealed paintings of children. Their eyes had been violently scratched out of the canvas. One portrait froze her in place. A boy named Elias Beaumont, aged 7, with sad eyes and a dim smile. Underneath his name, the years of his life were written, but the date of his death was smudged out as though erased. The next portrait she uncovered was of a little girl named Clara. Maribel recognized her instantly. Clara had been one of the missing children, one of the ones adopted only days before. The painting made it clear that she had been here long before Maribel ever arrived. One day, Maribel gathered her courage and went to the east wing. The hallways grew colder as she approached. The floor creaked differently, as though hollower, and the walls seemed to bulge imperceptibly, like something inside them was shifting. At the end of the corridor was a chained door with deep scratch marks around the lock. Someone had carved words into the wood: "Leave me alone." Maribel reached out to touch the carving and instantly froze. 3 knocks echoed from the wall beside her, slow, deliberate, as though someone on the inside had waited all day for her to arrive. She ran, not stopping until she reached the safety of the main hall, and she swore she heard soft laughter behind her. Maribel's fear sharpened into determination. She began watching the staff, especially Miss Crowley. One morning, she saw the housekeeper lift a rug in the hallway and open a hidden trap door. Maribel sneaked behind her, waiting until the housekeeper disappeared down the stairs before quietly following. The basement was enormous. It looked like a forgotten dormitory, with beds arranged in perfect rows, though all were empty and covered in dust. Toys were left scattered on the floor, dolls missing limbs, broken wooden horses, marbles, and cracked spinning tops. The walls were covered in tally marks, hundreds of them, etched deep into the stone. At the center was a massive metal door. Maribel approached it, her heart racing, and leaned close. Behind the door was breathing, slow, heavy breathing, like something that had been asleep for years but was beginning to wake. Before she could run, Miss Crawley emerged from the shadows and grabbed her by the wrist, hissing, "Children, do not come down here." She dragged Maribel out and locked the basement again. The fear Maribel felt began to twist into a new emotion: defiance. She waited until night, when Lady Beaumont and the staff slept, and crept into the lady's private study. Inside a locked drawer, she found a bundle of letters. They were written in Lady Beaumont's handwriting, dated decades earlier. The letters told the story of Elias, her only son. He had vanished inside the manor at age 7. Vanished, not died. Villagers believed the house itself had taken him, that the walls hid something hungry. Lady Beaumont refused to accept his loss and converted the mansion into an orphanage to keep the house satisfied. The letters grew increasingly frantic, describing how Elias's voice echoed in the walls, asking for company, asking for children to stay with him. Maribel's hands shook as she read. Lady Beaumont hadn't opened the orphanage out of kindness. She had opened it to feed the house, to feed whatever Elias had become. The next night, Maribel returned to the east wing. This time, the chained door was open. The room beyond was small, lit only by moonlight from a cracked window. A tiny bed sat in the corner, under a threadbare blanket. A broken toy sat on the floor, and crouched in the corner was a pale boy with long, tangled hair covering his face. Maribel spoke softly. "Are you Elias?" The boy lifted his head. His eyes were hollow black voids, endless and hungry. He whispered, "I'm so lonely." Maribel stepped back, but the boy crawled toward her in unnatural, bending movements. She turned and ran, hearing him climbing the walls behind her, his hands slapping against them like wet clay. When she reached the main hall, she found chaos. Children running, doors slamming, shadows crawling along the walls and floors. The manor seemed alive, groaning and twisting. Lady Beaumont stood calmly at the top of the stairs, whispering, "Elias, take only the disobedient ones." But Elias ignored her completely. The walls bulged as shadowy hands emerged, gripping ankles, pulling children into cracks that seemed too small for any human body. Maribel raced toward the hidden trapdoor and escaped into the basement. She reached the metal door and opened it. Inside, she found piles of old clothes, tiny shoes, bones scattered in corners, and small carvings etched everywhere that said, "I want to go home." In the middle of the room, she found Elias again, but smaller, less monstrous, like a normal child. He said quietly, "I didn't eat them, she did." The silence inside the abandoned settlement grew heavier, as if the air itself remembered every scream that had ever been swallowed by its walls. The journalist's footsteps echoed faintly as he moved deeper into the ruins, gripping his notebook like a lifeline. The chill that clung to the place wasn't from the cold. It was older and aware. He pushed open the warped door of a house half collapsed from time. Inside, dust floated like pale ashes in the thin beam of sunlight. Old photographs were scattered across the floor, entire families frozen in smiles. But their eyes, every one of them, looked slightly off, as if they were glancing at something just behind the camera, something approaching. The journalist bent down and picked up one of the photos. It showed a young girl holding a wooden doll. Her smile was soft, innocent, but behind her, barely visible, was a dark smudge in the corner of the room, a twisted outline like a shadow that didn't belong to any person in the picture. His hands trembled. He turned the photo over. A message had been scribbled in a child's handwriting. "She comes for those who stay past sunset." He placed it gently back onto the floor. The more houses he entered, the more evidence he found. Notes, warnings, frantic journal entries written in the hours before the people vanished. Many said they heard knocking at their windows, even when no one was outside. Others described voices calling their names from the forest in the dead of night. Some claimed their children started sleepwalking, always heading toward the same direction, the abandoned mine at the edge of the settlement. The mine was supposed to have been sealed decades earlier, but the path leading to it was freshly disturbed, as if someone or something had been passing through recently. Curiosity pulled him toward the tree line. But as he approached the forest, he noticed something strange. The trees were unnaturally straight, spaced apart with eerie uniformity, as if planted with mathematical precision. Their branches twisted downward like fingers, and as the wind blew, their trunks creaked, almost like breathing. The journalist swallowed hard and stepped inside. The forest was quiet, in the kind of way that warns you not to move. No birds, no insects, just a deep, oppressive stillness. Until he heard it. A whisper. Soft, thin, female, calling his name. He froze. The whisper came again, not from behind him, not from ahead, from every direction at once. He backed away, but his foot struck something. He looked down. A small wooden doll lay at the roots of a tree, carved in the shape of a girl. Its face was painted crudely, its smile wide and unsettling. He had seen this doll before, in the photograph from the first house. As he reached for the doll, a sudden gust of icy air hit him. The trees began to sway, bending unnaturally. The whispering grew louder, shifting into a low chant. His instinct screamed at him to run. He turned and sprinted back toward the settlement. But when he broke through the tree line, he was no longer facing the houses from before. The entire layout of the settlement had changed. Buildings that were once on the left were now on the right. Streets curved in impossible directions, forming loops that shouldn't exist. Windows stared at him in rows like watching eyes. The village was rearranging itself around him. He stumbled backward, breath shaking. Each house was shifting slightly, like pieces on a board. The settlement was alive, reshaping itself, closing him in. He approached a nearby door and pushed it open. The house was lit softly by lanterns. Fresh food was placed neatly on the table. It smelled warm, as if someone had prepared it moments ago, but no one was inside. There, on the wall, written in red chalk, was a sentence: "You cannot leave until she chooses you." The journalist backed away slowly. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He needed to find the mine. Every piece of testimony pointed to that place as the origin of the disappearances. He navigated the shifting corridors of the settlement, following the distant rumble beneath the earth, an unnatural sound, like stone grinding on bone. After what felt like hours, he finally reached the old mine entrance. The wooden beams supporting it were cracked, ready to collapse. The sign that once warned villagers to stay away was missing entirely. Someone had ripped it off. He stepped inside. The mine tunnel stretched endlessly into darkness, illuminated only by the dim light of his flashlight. The walls were damp and cold. Strange symbols were carved into the stone, spirals, distorted faces, eyes without pupils. As he moved deeper, he noticed something. Footprints, small ones, bare, leading further down. Children's footprints, but alongside them were larger ones, much larger, deformed, as though they belonged to something that used to be human, but wasn't anymore. His pulse quickened, and then he heard it, a soft humming, a lullaby, a woman's voice, the same voice that whispered his name in the forest. The humming echoed down the tunnel, resonating against the stone. It shook the air around him. It wasn't comforting, it was hungry. As he approached the sound, he entered a vast cavern, and there they were, dozens of wooden dolls lined up on the ground, each carved with disturbing accuracy, each one modeled after a missing villager. He scanned them with horror. Every doll's eyes were filled with real human teeth. He turned, heart hammering, and finally saw her. A tall, emaciated figure standing motionless in the shadows at the far end of the cavern. Her hair hung long over her face like dripping black vines. Her limbs were impossibly thin, joints bending the wrong way. Her dress was torn and faded, stained with earth and time. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her face was an empty void. No eyes, no nose, only a jagged mouth stretching far wider than any human's. The humming stopped. The cavern plunged into a silence so profound it felt violent. Then she stepped forward, one step, another. Her movements were jerky, like a marionette pulled by unseen strings. The journalist staggered backward, tripping over the dolls. Her head tilted sharply to the side. She spoke, but her voice came from everywhere at once. "You came looking for them." The journalist's legs shook. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. She crouched down, inches from his face, her mouth curling open wider. Rows of needle-like teeth glinted in the darkness. "Now they are looking for you." From behind him, dozens of tiny footsteps echoed. The dolls began to move. Their wooden heads snapped toward him in perfect unison. He bolted. The cavern exploded into chaos as the dolls swarmed after him, their tiny feet tapping rapidly like frantic insects. The tall woman moved smoothly behind them, gliding without touching the ground. He raced through the tunnels, lungs burning, flashlight shaking in his hand. But the mine paths were changing, twisting, shifting, leading him deeper instead of out. The walls pulsed, almost breathing. Something grabbed his ankle. He kicked wildly and broke free, stumbling into a narrow passageway. It led upward, maybe toward the surface. He climbed, desperate, using both hands and knees. As he reached the top of the incline, he emerged into a child's bedroom. perfectly preserved, painted walls, toys neatly in place, a small bed covered in a floral blanket. He stared in disbelief. The settlement, the houses, the mine, the forest, it was all connected, merging into one living labyrinth. On the bed sat the girl from the photograph, her wooden doll in her lap. She looked up at him slowly. Her eyes were hollow, empty sockets. Her voice was a whisper. "She won't let you go." The house shook violently. The windows shattered inward. Darkness seeped through the cracks in the walls like ink. The tall woman stepped into the room. This time, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The journalist realized in that moment the villagers never disappeared. They were never taken somewhere else. They had become part of the settlement itself, part of her. And now, so would he. The walls of the child's bedroom pulsed like living flesh, each tremor rattling the floorboards beneath the journalist's feet. The girl continued to stare at him with those empty sockets, two hollow tunnels into darkness. Her wooden doll slid slowly from her hands and landed on the floor with a soft thud. The journalist backed toward the doorway, but the moment he reached it, the hallway beyond shifted. What had once been a narrow corridor was now a long, spiraling stretch of mismatched doors, each one leading to a different architectural style: Victorian, farmhouse, modern, rustic, like the village homes fused together into an impossible maze. Behind him, the tall, faceless woman leaned further into the room, her limbs scraping the walls as she moved. Her mouth opened, and a low, vibrating hum filled the air. The girl on the bed tilted her head sharply, as if responding to a silent command. The journalist turned and ran into the hallway. He threw open the first door. Inside was a dining room frozen in time, a table set for 6, fresh bowls of soup steaming softly, untouched for decades, 5 chairs, and a 6th chair turned slightly outward, its cushion dented, as if someone had just been sitting there. He closed the door quickly. The humming grew louder behind him, reverberating through the walls. He sprinted to the next door. This room was a schoolhouse, dusty chalkboard, rows of wooden desks, children's drawings hanging from the walls, stick figures, houses, trees, and behind each one the same shape drawn over and over again. A tall shadow with long limbs. He slammed the door shut. His heart thundered as he moved deeper down the hallway. Every door revealed a different memory of the vanished villagers. Kitchens still stocked with food, living rooms with glowing lanterns, bedrooms with neatly made beds. It was as if the village had been swallowed whole and arranged inside a living maze. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him, but they weren't the woman's slow, dragging steps. These were small, rapid taps, the running of wooden feet. The doll's. He ran faster. The hallway forked into 2 twisting paths. He chose the left without thinking, only wanting to put distance between himself and whatever was closing in behind him. But the hallway suddenly sloped downward, becoming a steep staircase spiraling into darkness. He lost his footing and tumbled, crashing into the darkness below. Pain shot through his limbs as he finally landed. He struggled to his knees. He was back in the mine, but it wasn't the same. The walls were now lined with shelves, and on each one sat wooden dolls, hundreds of them, each carved in uncanny detail, some smiling, some crying, some with tiny hands raised as if begging.
He realized they were arranged in chronological order. The earliest ones were crude, simple, roughly shaped. Then, as the shelves continued deeper, the carvings grew more lifelike, more precise, more disturbing. The final shelf was empty, waiting for him. A faint breath brushed the back of his neck. He turned slowly. She was standing inches away. Her face, an empty void, hovered above him. Her long fingers, thin and jointed like snapped branches, reached toward his throat. Her mouth stretched wider, jagged edges glistening in the dark. But before she could touch him, a loud crack ripped through the cavern. The ground trembled violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. The shelves rattled and toppled, spilling the dolls across the stone floor. She snapped her head toward the source of the sound, the hum in her throat turning harsh and distorted. The journalist used the distraction to scramble to his feet. A long tunnel opened ahead of him, one he hadn't noticed before. Something in him knew he had to follow it, even if it led deeper underground. Anything to escape her. He ran. The tunnel narrowed, forcing him to crouch. The air grew denser, metallic. The stone beneath his hands was wet, slick with moisture. Strange markings glowed faintly along the walls, pulsating with a heartbeat rhythm. He crawled until the tunnel opened into a hidden chamber. At the center stood a massive stone altar, covered in carvings depicting the village's history, families arriving, building homes, thriving in peace. Then the carvings changed. Darkness seeping in from the surrounding mountains, a woman shunned by the villagers, a punishment, a burial deep within the mine, a curse unleashed. He leaned closer. One carving showed the woman, alive, human, being dragged into the mine by villagers, her face twisted not in evil, but in agony, in betrayal. This place wasn't her domain. It was her tomb. The journalist suddenly understood. She wasn't always a monster. She became one after being left underground to die. A faint sound echoed behind him, a voice, a child's whisper. "Help her." He turned. The girl from the bedroom stood in the chamber's entrance, clutching her wooden doll. Her empty sockets seemed to flicker with something, not malice, but sorrow. "She's angry because she was forgotten, and she made us stay because she had no one left." The earth shook again as the tall woman approached, filling the entrance. The girl slowly stepped between her and the journalist. "Please stop," the girl said, but the woman moved her aside. She was beyond reason. The chamber began collapsing. Stones cracked. Dust filled the air. The journalist stumbled backward, searching for an escape, but there was none. The altar was the only solid structure. The woman reached for him, her fingers stretching, splitting, forming more branches, more limbs. He closed his eyes. Then, a loud, echoing crack erupted through the chamber. The altar split open. Inside it was not stone, but a skeleton, the remains of the woman, her real form. Her curse, her rage, her centuries of pain, anchored to these bones. The journalist touched the skeleton. For a moment, everything stopped. The rumbling, the dust, the movement of the tall creature. She froze. Her limbs twitched violently. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. The cavern trembled as the spirit tethered to her remains was forced to confront its forgotten body. A sound, low, mournful, escaped her. The girl stepped forward. "It's time to rest," she whispered. The tall woman, once human, once wronged, began to shrink. Her limbs crumpled inward, her hair dissolved into dust, her void-like face softened into something faintly human. Her final expression was not rage, but relief. And then she collapsed into ashes. The dolls around the cavern fell silent. The tunnel walls stopped shifting. The village above ceased its breathing. The journalist looked at the girl, her empty eyes flickering like dying candles. "You freed her," she said softly, "but we remain." He took a step back. "What do you mean, remain?" She held up her wooden doll. "When the curse bound her, it bound us too." The dolls across the floor twitched. One by one, their carved heads turned toward him. "We cannot leave. The village is our grave now." Before he could respond, her body faded into dust, falling gently like snow. The dolls fell still. Silence swallowed the chamber. The journalist stood alone. He made his way back through the tunnels, back through the shifting hallways that no longer shifted, back through the houses that no longer breathed. When he finally stepped outside, the sun was rising. The settlement looked empty, peaceful, untouched, except for one thing. At the village center stood a small wooden doll, carved in his exact likeness. He stared at it, breath trembling. Then the doll's eyes blinked, once, twice, and its lips curled into a faint smile. The curse was gone, but the village remembered him. It always would.
The journalist stared at the wooden doll carved in his likeness, its small smile fixed as if it knew something he didn't. A cold unease crept up his spine. The village was silent again, but not empty, never empty. The air carried a weight, a lingering presence, like dozens of unseen eyes hidden behind curtains that no longer moved. He reached down slowly and picked up the doll. The wood was warm, as if it had just been carved moments earlier. He set it down carefully on an old stone step and stepped back. His heartbeat slowed as he tried to gather himself. The nightmare was over. He had survived. He had freed the spirit. The village was no longer twisting itself into a labyrinth of moving rooms and echoing halls. But something still felt wrong. He took a deep breath and walked toward the path that led out of the settlement. The trees swayed gently in a morning breeze. The forest looked normal again. Birds were finally singing, breaking the long, unnatural silence. He stepped into the forest and stopped. The path ahead was familiar, but the forest wasn't. The trees were still perfectly spaced, uniform, unnaturally so, as if someone or something had planted them with deliberate intent. He moved deeper into the woods, following the trail he remembered entering from. The ground crunched under his boots. The air smelled normal again. Light filtered through the canopy. Then he saw it, another wooden doll, sitting at the base of a tree. This one was not carved like him. It resembled an elderly woman. Its eyes were two tiny black stones, its mouth a straight line. He approached carefully.
The ground around the doll was disturbed, as if dozens of tiny feet had scurried around it. He knelt down and examined the tree. Carved into its trunk was a message: "We remember everything." A chill wrapped around his spine. He looked back toward the settlement in the distance. The houses stood still, no longer rearranging themselves, but the atmosphere had not lightened. The place felt less like a village freed from a curse, and more like a graveyard that had just closed its gates.
The journalist continued walking. Another doll appeared on the path, then another, and another, each carved to resemble the villager who had vanished. The dolls lined the trail like silent witnesses. He tried to ignore them and keep moving, but something unnatural prickled at his skin. The forest around him grew darker, though the sky was bright. The shadows stretched longer on the ground, moving slightly even when the trees didn't. He picked up his pace. Soon he reached the river that marked the boundary of the settlement. Once he crossed it, he would be free. But the moment he approached the bridge, he realized something horrifying. The water was flowing upward, defying gravity, rising into the air like a reversed waterfall, collecting into a suspended sphere above the stream. Inside that sphere, the distorted face of the tall woman appeared, not fully formed, not alive, but not gone. Her voice echoed faintly, carried on the unnatural current. "You freed my soul, but not my memory." The journalist stumbled backward. The ground beneath him trembled, but only for a second. The sphere of water collapsed back into the river with a splash. Her face was gone. The journalist didn't wait. He ran across the bridge and didn't look back until he reached the tree line where the forest opened to a dirt road leading toward civilization. Only then did he stop to catch his breath. He turned back slowly. The village was barely visible now, swallowed by the trees. But there, at the edge of the forest, stood the girl he had spoken to in the chamber, the one whose body had turned to dust. She was whole again. Her empty sockets stared at him from across the distance. She did not move. She simply stood and watched. His legs nearly gave out. When he blinked, she was gone. The journalist returned to his car, parked miles away. His hands shook as he fumbled for the keys. Once he was inside, he locked the doors, even though he knew it was irrational, then sat for a long moment without starting the engine. He looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. But something was wrong. It wasn't his reflection. The face staring back at him was wooden, carved, emotionless. He gasped and twisted around, but he was alone in the car. He looked back at the mirror. His normal reflection returned. He started the engine and drove as fast as the rough road allowed. For the next several miles he drove in silence, glancing repeatedly at the mirror. Each time his reflection was normal. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to believe that he was finally leaving the nightmare behind. But when he reached the outskirts of the nearest town, he stopped at a gas station to refuel. As he stepped out of the car, the attendant stepped outside, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You all right? You look pale." The journalist opened his mouth, but hesitated. "Yes," he said, "just tired." The attendant nodded sympathetically. "Happens. Folks around here don't usually go near that old settlement." The journalist froze. You know about it? Used to be stories about it. Disappearing villagers, strange lights at night. Whole place cursed, they said. But all that was long before my time. He pointed at something in the back of the journalist's car. What's with all the dolls? The journalist's blood ran cold. He turned around. The back seat, previously empty, was filled with wooden dolls. Dozens of them, all staring at him, all carved with his face. His knees weakened. The attendant backed away slowly, sensing something was very wrong. The journalist took a step toward the car. One of the dolls tilted its head. A whisper echoed faintly from inside the car. "She isn't gone." He stumbled back. The attendant rushed inside the gas station, locking the door behind him, terrified. The journalist stood frozen as the dolls shifted, their wooden lips clicking softly in unison. The whisper grew louder. "She remembers you." His breath caught in his throat. He turned and ran, leaving the car, the road, everything behind, as the whisper followed him into the distance. The curse was not tied to the village anymore. It was tied to him. And now it was following him home. The motel room dissolved around him, its walls stretching outward like fabric pulled too thin. The floor beneath his feet softened, then hardened again, reshaping itself into cold stone. The smell of dust filled his lungs. The darkness swallowed everything except the faint outline of the tall woman standing only a few feet away. She didn't move. She didn't reach for him. She only stood there, her head slightly bowed, as though waiting. The journalist tried to step back, but the darkness had become solid behind him. He was trapped in a space with no edges, no doors, no air, only her. He forced himself to speak. "What do you want from me?" Her head twitched upward, slowly, painfully. Then she raised one hand and pointed not at him, but at something behind him. He turned. A small wooden table materialized out of the shadows. On it lay the skeleton he had seen in the altar, the remains of the real woman, buried alive, forgotten by her village. But now the bones were arranged neatly, cleaned, polished, almost reverently placed. Beside the skeleton, a second set of bones, small, fragile, a child. The truth came crashing down on him. The village hadn't lied. The villagers hadn't disappeared because of her. They disappeared because they buried her child alive beside her. A punishment born out of superstition and fear. A mistake that created the curse. The tall woman lowered her head again, her entire body trembling. For the first time, the journalist didn't feel terror when he looked at her. He felt grief. She wasn't pointing to the bones. She was pointing to him, to his hands, to what she wanted him to do. He approached slowly, each step sinking into the thick darkness beneath him. When he reached the table, he knelt beside the bones. They were arranged with care, but unfinished, like someone had tried for decades to piece together a story, only to fail every time. He realized what she wanted. "Tell it," he whispered. "You want someone to tell your story." The tall woman's head twitched upward, slowly, painfully. Then she raised one hand and pointed not at him, but at something behind him. He turned. A small wooden table materialized out of the shadows.
On it lay the skeleton he had seen in the altar, the remains of the real woman, buried alive, forgotten by her village. But now the bones were arranged neatly, cleaned, polished, almost reverently placed. Beside the skeleton, a second set of bones, small, fragile, a child. The truth came crashing down on him. The village hadn't lied. The villagers hadn't disappeared because of her. They disappeared because they buried her child alive beside her. A punishment born out of superstition and fear. A mistake that created the curse. The tall woman lowered her head again, her entire body trembling. For the first time, the journalist didn't feel terror when he looked at her. He felt grief. She wasn't pointing to the bones. She was pointing to him, to his hands, to what she wanted him to do. He approached slowly, each step sinking into the thick darkness beneath him. When he reached the table, he knelt beside the bones. They were arranged with care, but unfinished, like someone had tried for decades to piece together a story, only to fail every time. He realized what she wanted. "Tell it," he whispered. "You want someone to tell your story." The tall woman's head twitched upward, slowly, painfully. Then she raised one hand and pointed not at him, but at something behind him. He turned. A small wooden table materialized out of the shadows. On it lay the skeleton he had seen in the altar, the remains of the real woman, buried alive, forgotten by her village. But now the bones were arranged neatly, cleaned, polished, almost reverently placed. Beside the skeleton, a second set of bones, small, fragile, a child. The truth came crashing down on him. The village hadn't lied. The villagers hadn't disappeared because of her. They disappeared because they buried her child alive beside her. A punishment born out of superstition and fear. A mistake that created the curse. The tall woman lowered her head again, her entire body trembling. For the first time, the journalist didn't feel terror when he looked at her. He felt grief. She wasn't pointing to the bones. She was pointing to him, to his hands, to what she wanted him to do. He approached slowly, each step sinking into the thick darkness beneath him. When he reached the table, he knelt beside the bones. They were arranged with care, but unfinished, like someone had tried for decades to piece together a story, only to fail every time. He realized what she wanted. "Tell it," he whispered. "You want someone to tell your story." The tall woman's head twitched upward, slowly, painfully. Then she raised one hand and pointed not at him, but at something behind him. He turned. A small wooden table materialized out of the shadows. On it lay the skeleton he had seen in the altar, the remains of the real woman, buried alive, forgotten by her village. But now the bones were arranged neatly, cleaned, polished, almost reverently placed. Beside the skeleton, a second set of bones, small, fragile, a child. The truth came crashing down on him. The village hadn't lied. The villagers hadn't disappeared because of her. They disappeared because they buried her child alive beside her. A punishment born out of superstition and fear. A mistake that created the curse. The tall woman lowered her head again, her entire body trembling.
For the first time, the journalist didn't feel terror when he looked at her. He felt grief. She wasn't pointing to the bones. She was pointing to him, to his hands, to what she wanted him to do. He approached slowly, each step sinking into the thick darkness beneath him. When he reached the table, he knelt beside the bones. They were arranged with care, but unfinished, like someone had tried for decades to piece together a story, only to fail every time. He realized what she wanted. "Tell it," he whispered. "You want someone to tell your story." The tall woman's head twitched upward, slowly, painfully. Then she raised one hand and pointed not at him, but at something behind him. He turned. A small wooden table materialized out of the shadows. On it lay the skeleton he had seen in the altar, the remains of the real woman, buried alive, forgotten by her village. But now the bones were arranged neatly, cleaned, polished, almost reverently placed. Beside the skeleton, a second set of bones, small, fragile, a child. The truth came crashing down on him. The village hadn't lied. The villagers hadn't disappeared because of her. They disappeared because they buried her child alive beside her. A punishment born out of superstition and fear. A mistake that created the curse. The tall woman lowered her head again, her entire body trembling. For the first time, the journalist didn't feel terror when he looked at her. He felt grief. She wasn't pointing to the bones. She was pointing to him, to his hands, to what she wanted him to do. He approached slowly, each step sinking into the thick darkness beneath him. When he reached the table, he knelt beside the bones. They were arranged with care, but unfinished, like someone had tried for decades to piece together a story, only to fail every time. She realized what she wanted. "Tell it," he whispered. "You want someone to tell your story." The tall woman's head tilted slightly, as if acknowledging him. Her body shimmered faintly, the jagged edges of her shape softening for the first time since he had seen her. The journalist placed his hand gently on the child's skeletal fingers. A sound rippled through the darkness, soft, faint. A child's laughter, warm, real, alive, echoed for a brief, heartbreaking moment. The tall woman straightened, her long limbs folding inward as she sank slowly to her knees. For the first time, she did not tower above him. She knelt beside the table and lowered her face toward the tiny bones. Her form flickered, the monstrous shape dissolving, revealing for a heartbeat the woman she once was. A mother, a human being, a grieving soul trapped in endless agony. The darkness around them thinned. The walls of the motel room slowly returned. The table disappeared. The bones vanished. The child's soft laugh faded. And the tall woman, she looked at him one last time. Her faceless void shimmered with something he recognized as relief. Then her body dissolved into drifting ash, scattering gently across the motel room floor like snow. She was gone, truly gone. The curse was lifted at the source. For the first time since he entered the village, silence didn't feel threatening. It felt final, complete. The motel room returned fully to reality. The walls were still, The air was calm. The dolls outside the door were gone. The journalist collapsed onto the bed, his body weak, his clothes soaked in sweat. He stared at the ceiling for hours, unable to move, unable to think, unable to believe he was finally free. But he wasn't. Not completely. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the motel window. The room smelled of dust and faintly of wood. Birds chirped outside. People talked in the distance. The world had returned to normal. The journalist sat up slowly and gathered his things. His bag was lighter. He unzipped it and looked inside. Everything was there: notes, camera, maps, except the wooden carving in his likeness. It was gone. He felt a faint chill, not fear, but a strange, empty sadness. He checked out of the motel and drove home. The entire ride felt unreal, like a dream he wasn't fully awake from. But he made it. He parked in front of his house, walked inside, and locked the door behind him. The house was quiet, safe. He placed his camera and notepad on his desk and sat down heavily. For a long time he didn't move. Then he noticed something. On the desk, beside his notepad, a single wooden carving knife, old, worn, used, and beneath it a small slip of paper. He unfolded it. One sentence was written in the same childlike handwriting he had seen throughout the village. "Tell our story so we can rest." He exhaled slowly. The curse wasn't following him. The village wasn't bound to him. The spirits weren't haunting him. They had given him a responsibility to speak for them, to remember them, to tell the truth they were never given in life. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He knew exactly what he would do. He would tell their story to the world. He would give them the voice they were denied. He would ensure they were forgotten no longer. And somewhere, deep in a forest forgotten by time, an old abandoned settlement finally exhaled. Not in anger, not in hunger, but in peace. The curse was gone at last. The darkness has finally lifted. The village that once swallowed its children, that twisted reality around itself, now lies in silence. The spirits, finally freed, rest in peace. But the story will never be forgotten. If you want to uncover more secrets, more horrors, and the darkest tales that hide in shadows, stay with us. Subscribe to Knox Hour, turn on notifications, and join us as we explore the chilling, the mysterious, and the terrifying stories you've never heard before. Because the world is full of darkness, and we are here to bring it to light. Remember, some stories aren't just stories, they're warnings. So hit subscribe and don't miss what comes next.